Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. I hope you're having a great day. And today we're here with a response video to fellow attorney Robert Gruler of R&R Law Group, who has a fantastic law review channel. I've been enjoying his work, particularly as it relates to the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting in Kenosha, and going through the details and maps and going through the self-defense analysis. I thought it's been particularly good. And this same attorney, Robert Gruler, has recently produced a series of videos, which I assume are excerpts of a longer work entitled Dealing with Jacob Blake, which is in many ways the start of this whole rodeo. So the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting would not have occurred but for the Jacob Blake shooting. And Jacob Blake was an African-American individual who was shot several times during the course of an arrest. He lived, and he is currently under arrest for various crimes, but this shooting was seen as improper. And Robert here also thinks the shooting was unjust. He thinks it was an improper shooting. I'm of the opinion that it was a lawful shooting. Now, that opinion being what it is, I want to make absolutely clear going into this that I think that Robert Gruler is a good attorney. I think that he's presenting a cogent opinion, and I think that he's presenting cogent analysis, and I've been particularly a fan of his work on Kyle Rittenhouse. So unlike some other internet law people whose names will go unmentioned, I think Robert Gruler is a good attorney. And so I'm assuming that this is all presented in good faith. And so I'm going to interpret it as such. And so my analysis should be understood as one colleague critiquing another, one colleague trying to present a different professional opinion, rather than as me trying to beat him into the ground. Other attorneys get beaten into the ground, not Robert. Robert is one of the good ones. We all know who we're talking about, right? Yeah, we won't mention them by name. So anyways, we've got a couple different videos from him, from Robert here, and we're going to play them in full. I assume these are excerpts of larger works, but they are the videos that he's cut up into full. And so we'll present them and we will comment on them and present my own analysis and commentary and critique, because I think that he is getting some of this wrong. So, and hopefully maybe it will turn into a thing, and maybe we'll have a stream it together. That'll be great. Robert, if you're out there, I just want to let you know that I'd be very interested in streaming with you. I'd be happy to talk about Kyle, be happy to talk about the shooting. We could talk about other stuff. It seems like you seem like you got some good stuff going on. So anyways, let's listen to this. There's 3 videos that he produced of varying lengths. So this first video is from his channel and is entitled "Did Jacob Blake Have a Knife?", which has been one of the issues of contention. This guy who was shot multiple times, maybe he had a knife. Maybe that was just cause. So we're going to watch this video. Again, I'm presenting this in full for a couple reasons. I don't want to be accused of misrepresenting or mischaracterizing his commentary. So I thought about trying to cut it up or do different things with it. But I wanted to make sure that we're responding to everything that he said. I don't want to be accused of presenting a off picture. I want to make sure that we're making sure that we're responding to everything he has to say and giving a full and complete commentary and critique. So we'll listen to what he has to say. We'll pause along the way of areas of disagreement. So let's watch this and see what he has to say, and let's comment and critique along the way. Let's get started with this.
Let's go through and let's talk now about the second video from the Jacob Blake case. So this video was something that got a lot of feedback on our YouTube channel. A lot of people unhappy with the analysis on this video. That's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to look at it again. We're going to look at the 2 videos again, and we're going to do an analysis and see if anything changes in our rubric, in our...
See, immediately I like this guy. Because people have been commenting on his channel and critiquing him and commenting him and thinking like, maybe you're not getting it, maybe you're not seeing it. And what does he do? He goes back and like, okay, let me go watch the video again. Let me go back to the source material and take another look at it and respond to it. Like, I'm actually paying attention. When people say, if they leave me a comment, I will sustain or object. He actually does it. He actually sustains or overrules people's objections, unlike some other legal commentators. So he's actually respecting his fans. What a concept. Amazing. He actually respects the people who watch his channel. Deep thoughts. So yeah, let's listen some more.
Scorecard. So let's go over to the first video, and then we're going to watch the second video right after that. Then we're going to dive in and we're going to dissect some things. So let's take a look at video number 1. You've probably seen it 100 times, but let's look at it just one more time. Oops, sorry. All right, so that was the first video.
All right, so I'm going to just go back so we can go watch it again together now that we've seen it in full. So we can go back. So where we see Blake is on the passenger rear side of the car, where this whole where this video starts. He's on the passenger rear. He walks around over the front of the car, comes around to the driver's side, opens up the driver's side fully. He opens up the door and he's leaning in. So let's go back and we'll watch that again and just see exactly how this whole thing goes down. So let's watch that again with that, just taking a look at where people's positions are and what they're doing, because I think it's important to go to the tape, as it were.
One more time. Oops, sorry. All right, so that was the first video.
All right, so we saw that whole confrontation. And what's going to be very important to my analysis is that it appears the officers attempted to use tasers before the shooting took place. So it isn't necessarily apparent on the video that we saw, but the reports are that the police attempted to use tasers as part of their attempt to perform this arrest. So they used other less lethal mechanisms before they resorted to firearms. And I think that's important as we look to continuation of force and how police are trained in terms of using different levels of force for different. So they tried lesser levels of force first. So let's listen a little bit more of the video and we'll get into some of the analysis as we go on.
All seen that a million times. I did not play the second video on my channel just yet. So let's take that one.
Get my son! Get my son! Get my son! Come on, TJ! TJ! You a bogus bitch! This bitch is bogus!
Now you see the police are trying to struggle with him. It looks like the police are trying to struggle with him as he's by the passenger rear wheel. It looks like he's kind of down on the ground a little bit, where it's sort of in that position where they're trying to wrestle him down to the ground. This might be where they're trying to tase him. So maybe he's responding to the taser. But he seems to be crouched over, not on the ground, but maybe on all fours or something in that position by the by that rear tire. All right, so the rear passenger tire. So let's watch some more.
Mom, get back! Mom! 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 You have to get back!
All right, so this is the video that everybody was unhappy that I did not have or did not show, because they say that this video adjusts my entire analysis. That basically, as we're looking through this, I think the allegation is that right here, they are engaging in a little bit of a tussle. So we really can't see anybody come around the side of that corner there until looks like somebody's on the ground there. It's probably Jacob. And then there's a couple cops who are just standing right around him. Now he looks like he's on the ground. We got one cop there. Keep moving forward. There were 4 cops total. Another cop sort of just standing there. And the crowd is coming together, and the cops are going to be looking to, hold people back. Cameraman is not making our life easy. This is a difficult angle of the video. Now here it is. Okay, so you can see him. When I was doing my analysis on the other video, I talked about him just popping up. So where did he pop up from? Well, he's right there on the side of the car. He just boom, he pops right up, and he starts walking around the other side of the car. And if you listen closely, it sounds like you might be able to hear cops say, "Drop the knife." A lot of people are claiming that was said, but there was another article from somebody who was, I think, an eyewitness there said, "I didn't see a knife." Anyways, we're going to get to the knife in a minute. So we can see he's walking around. So look how slow these cops are. He's standing up and he's just walking around. It's not even at a fast pace. He's not running. He's not doing anything. So he gets into a tussle. They're turning the corner in like slow motion. They pull out the gun and they shoot him. All right. So that was somehow that video was supposed to be indicative of him, deserving to be shot in the back 7 times by the cops. I
would quibble here. I don't know that anyone is necessarily saying that he deserves to be shot 7 times in the back. I don't think that's quite what is being claimed, that he deserves it. But whether or not it's a lawful shoot or whether or not it's a justified shoot, I think is more the point. And trying to look at this whole picture about what's happening and trying to look at who's doing what and when in the timeline becomes really important. And so the police appear, based on what's available, that they were using tasers and using other less than lethal mechanisms to attempt to restrain this individual as part of a lawful arrest. They had a valid warrant out for him. There's a separate video dealing with that, but we'll get to that later. There's a separate warrant out for him. So they appear to be acting lawfully. They appear to be aware of that warrant. They appear to be trying to execute on that warrant. And they appear to be trying to use other mechanisms to conduct that arrest as part of executing that warrant. And he appears to be resisting arrest. He appears to be resisting physical attempts at arrest. There appears to be some sort of physical altercation between him and the police officers where there's some sort of laying of hands where maybe they're trying to get him to the ground. There appears to be a use of a taser to try to get him to the ground. So they're trying to use other mechanisms to conduct the arrest. The United States Supreme Court has been very clear that you can't use deadly force merely for the purpose of conducting an arrest. So you can't shoot someone merely to arrest them. That isn't going to work. But as we see this continuation of force, it appears that the officers are trying to use continuation of force mechanisms, and they're not shooting him as he is doing anything other than when he actually gets to the car. Now, maybe the officers could have done something else. Maybe they could have run around, or maybe they could have tried to flank him, or maybe they could have tried to come around or whatever. Maybe there's a lot of things the police could have done. But if the police saw a knife, and maybe that's one of the reasons they didn't behave that way. Maybe there's a reason they didn't come around and try to physically confront him before he got to the driver's side. Because anyone who knows anything about a knife fight knows that the difference between the winner of a knife fight and the loser of a knife fight is the loser of a knife fight dies immediately. The winner of a knife fight dies on the way to the hospital. Yeah, so knife fights can be very, very ugly indeed. And so maybe there's reasons the police didn't try to run up on him or try to come around and try to circumvent him. Or maybe there's other things the police could have done. Maybe there's other reasonable steps they could have taken. So whether or not there's other reasonable steps they could have taken is not the legally operative question. It seems to me the legally operative question is whether or not the steps they took were reasonable, not whether there were other reasonable steps they could have done. There probably are many reasonable steps they could have taken. The question is, did the steps they take reasonable? That's the operative question. Was the action they took legal and justified? And so looking to the initial confrontation, it looks like the initial confrontation was lawful. They appear to have a valid warrant out. They appear to be conducting a valid arrest on the basis of a warrant. They appear to be using physical laying off of hands. They appear to be using tasers and other mechanisms. And there appear to be reasons that they might be behaving the way they do. All right, so let's listen a little bit more and see if we can get into the actual shooting itself.
I didn't see that at all. What I saw was two cops. He was on the ground. There certainly was an altercation, and then he pops up and he walks around the car in like slow motion. Two cops are too slow to catch up with him. The other two cops are just standing by. One cop
It's not necessarily clear to me that they were too slow to catch up with him. Again, there might have been tactical or strategic reasons they're behaving the way they did. And there might have been reasons to behave other than the way they did. And other actions may have been reasonable. So maybe it would have been more reasonable to run up on him. Maybe it would have been more reasonable to try to rush him. But the operative legal question is whether the actions they took were reasonable actions, not whether there were other actions that are reasonable, even whether or not there are actions that are more reasonable. The question is whether the actions they took are reasonable. Because when we're looking to the Fourth Amendment, the touchstone of the Fourth Amendment is reasonable, right? We don't allow unreasonable search and seizures. So when we're looking at this in the constitutional analysis, we're looking at a Fourth Amendment analysis, we look to unreasonable. The reason I keep saying reasonable is because it's the touchstone of the Fourth Amendment, and the Supreme Court uses that language, touchstone of the Fourth Amendment, reasonableness. Is it reasonable? When you're trying to stop somebody, that's a seizure of a person. So are the police acting reasonably to conduct that search or seizure in the context of the Fourth Amendment? So it's not could they have done other things? It's whether or not what they did is reasonable, or whether or not it's excessive force, or whether or not it's deprivation of due process, or whether or not it's excess force and punishment, whether it's any of those things, right? So we're trying to figure out, did the police did they act in an improper way? Let's listen to some more.
kind of runs around the other side of the vehicle. As soon as he gets away from him, they open fire, 7 shots, right in the back. So that was one angle. A couple of the criticisms I saw were, one, he had a knife. So let's address that first of all. We're not going to see it in this angle. We would have seen it from the first angle. Did he have a knife? So the question is, was there something in his hand that the police saw which justified them to pull their guns out and use deadly force? I said during my analysis at the last time, if he had a deadly weapon in his hand, the entire analysis changes. So did he? Let's look. All right, so here's what we've got. This is a screenshot. This is a still from the actual video, from the first video that I played. This is on the other side of the car. And a lot of people are highlighting this and they're saying, wait a minute, that's a knife, clear as day. You can see that in his hand. Somebody posted this on Twitter. It says it looks like one of these knives. And it looks like that's, that looks pretty good to me. I mean, that looks like it, right? If you have your hand here.
Now, I think this is an important aspect. It looks like it to me. It looks pretty good. So even our colleague here thinks it looks very similar to this knife. And that is really important. What it is in fact and what it appears to be can be obviously two different things. And when we're thinking about self-defense or justification of force or any of those things, we look to what things appear to be, not necessarily what they are in reality. What things are in reality and what they appear to be can be two completely different things. So to give the easiest possible hypothetical I can give would just be a pure act, would be a work of fiction versus reality. So if you wanted to stage a theatrical work in which you simulated, a robbery or a burglary, on a stage even, in a theater, you obviously could stage this and it would be a theatrical production, right? So it might appear to be one thing, but in reality, it's a mere fantasy. It's a mere action. Now, there's nothing that requires you to do it on a stage in a production theater, right? You could do it in a public space. You and a couple friends could get together and you could stage a production where you pretend to conduct a robbery. Not recommended. Not recommended, because, what it appears to be an outside observer will raise a whole host of issues. Not to mention that it could be perceived as disturbing the peace, but we'll get past that issue. Just on a purely even past that issue, if the police see what appears to be an ongoing burglary, an ongoing robbery, an ongoing theft, an ongoing murder, they're going to respond in a particular set of ways. These ways may or may not be beneficial to you. So it is not necessarily recommended that you and a couple friends just decide for the heck of it, well, you know what, let's just simulate a murder in open broad daylight. That seems like a good set of plans. The point is more the point that, like, what it appears to be and what it is in reality may be two different things. That's more the fundamental point I'm trying to draw here, right? What it appears to be and what it is may be disconnected. All right. So whether or not this is a knife in reality is not necessarily the most important question in this lawyer's humble opinion. Because what it reasonably appears to be to a reasonably prudent observer might be more important and might go to what the police do. If the police perceive an ongoing imminent threat of death or grievous bodily harm, particularly because there are kids sitting in this very vehicle that he is going to, there are civilians who are potentially in danger from this individual. There are kids in this car, all right? And if the police perceive him to have a knife, and they are giving him instructions, which, you know, is apparent, even if they aren't giving him verbal instructions, they're obviously trying to effect an arrest from their actions, right? You don't need to tell someone they're under arrest if it's readily apparent, right? You don't need to actually say the words, "You're under arrest," right? If you're trying to obviously put someone under arrest, it's readily apparent. So whether or not they said the words, "You're under arrest," which I assume they did, isn't really important because it's pretty clear he's under arrest, right? When you're being tased by the police, that's a clue. So, you know, if they perceive him to have a knife and they perceive him to be going into a place where there are civilians and such, they might act in a just way. Now, whether or not it's true in reality is a wholly separate thing. And then we might get into the reasonableness of the perception. But our own commentator here has said that he himself finds it to be a reasonable perception. He said, well, it looks good to me, right? He said, well, it looks like it looks the same to me. So even our expert commentator here, who I have respect for again, says that he thinks it appears to be that, even if it's not in fact that. And so the perception may in fact be more important than the reality. When it comes to these operative legal questions, let's listen to a little bit more.
Got all your four fingers grasped around this hand, around the handle, and that knife is sticking out. That looks pretty good.
You see, that looks pretty good is kind of a tell here for me. It's like, it appears to be that, whether or not it is in reality that. It looks pretty good is kind of where I think this legal analysis should stop. Right? What it is in reality, maybe in reality, it is a tasty pastry product. I'm not sure what pastry product that would be, but let's look past that issue because in reality, it could be lots of things. You know, maybe in reality, it's a tasty pastry project. What it appears to be may be more important. Let's listen some more.
It also looks to me like it could be a set of car keys.
I'm a little bit dubious that curve looks like a set of car keys. Just me, but I'm not really looking at that and thinking to myself, that looks like a set of car keys. Not really feeling it, but that's just me. Maybe your set of car keys looks different than mine, but I'm not really feeling that curved edge looks similar to a set of car keys. Just a personal opinion, but let's press on.
Could be, a keychain hanging out. Could have been a flashlight. It could have been a number of things.
Okay.
And the reason why I don't buy the knife story is I think we would have already seen the knife. And if we didn't, then the cops are even more incompetent than I had already thought. If Jacob Blake had a knife on him, the cops should have been out there with it in a little evidence bag, wagging it around in front of the cameras like 5 minutes after this happened. Hey, we have a knife. He had a knife. There was a gun in the car. There was a pair of nunchucks in the car. I don't care what the weapon was. If they had it at the time, it should have been disclosed to us. They could have saved a lot of buildings being burned and a lot of protesters if the cops would have come out and said, yeah, it's right here, morons. He had a knife, or, hey, here's the gun, idiots. He was reaching for.
I have to somewhat with love rebuke my friend's conclusion that if they had in fact found a knife and if they had in fact shown the knife, that it would have prevented things from being burned down and riots from having and so forth and so on. As we have, at least as I have learned from the recent coverage as regards the Trump supporter who was shot, and his shooter, who himself has been shot, and the police coverage of all, and the press coverage of all that. I have found the press coverage to be somewhat biased in my humble opinion. They have not been very fair in my estimation in terms of how they cover it. And they seem to be saying things like the person that was shot on the street for no reason is this super alt-right, super conservative alt-right, super alt-right, white supremacist alt-right person. And the person who shot him leans slightly left. I heard that on one news report. He leans slightly left. A person who describes himself as 100% Antifa leans slightly left. Just on a level of pure personal edification, if 100% Antifa is slightly left, I'd love to know what radical left looks like. What is it even anymore, hypothetically? But whatever. More to the point is, I don't know that necessarily had the police shown the knife or shown the firearm or shown the whatever, it would have prevented any of the riots. I'm not 100% sure I feel that conclusion. Of course, I am working in a counterfactual universe. We don't know for sure, nor can we, because that universe doesn't exist, because those series of events didn't happen. So we're all guessing. So it's not like one of us can be proven right or proven wrong. Maybe in an alternate universe where they found the knife and they showed the knife, the riots would have happened. I'm feeling a little bit doubtful myself. Let's listen some more.
Gun in the car. So the cops saw it and was totally justified. But that hasn't happened yet. If you even Google, did he have a knife? It's pure speculation. If there was something there, these cops would have already told us about it. It would have already been in a report somewhere. It would have been front page news. So I don't think that there was a knife. I just don't. And if there was, and the cops aren't telling us about it, then it's their own fault for not telling us about it.
Yeah, again, I have to challenge my friend here that if they had an alternate reality where they showed the thing, I'm not necessarily sure it would have been. But on a legal level, I think what things appear to be to a reasonable observer, or even subjectively for that matter, because we can view this subjectively from the perspective of the officers, or we can view this objectively from a reasonably prudent observer. Take your pick. But what it appears to be may be more legally operative than what it is in reality. You know, if you pull out something from your pocket and you point it at the police, they may shoot you even if it turns out it's a cell phone. Because what it appears to be and what it is in reality are not necessarily congruous. And there may be reasons that the police are not showing the thing, even if they found it. And they may not necessarily be doing incompetence. I'm not necessarily sure what would inflame passions more or less at this point. I'm not necessarily sure showing it would help, and I'm not necessarily sure that not showing it has inflamed passions, because apparently rioting and burning is the thing to do. Because we have mostly peaceful protests with burning. You know, despite the fires in the background, mostly peaceful protests. All right, let's listen to some more.
Want to know, this is part of the other reason where I really get aggressive in I want transparency, I want accountability, I want disclosure, I want discovery, I want this information out sooner rather than later, because if he did in fact have a knife, the entire analysis is over. It's a no-brainer. We don't even have to make.
Actually, to be strictly fair, this actually goes the other way too. Again, this goes to perception versus reality. So even if he had in fact a knife, if the police could not perceive it, it would be a legally unjustified shoot. This again goes to the perception versus reality, right? So just because you in fact have a knife, just because you in fact have a gun, is not dispositive. What was perceived by whom, in what way? You know, what is the justification? What is the reasonableness? So if you in fact have a knife, if you in fact have a gun, that's not enough, right? The police have to perceive some sort of threat, right? Just because you have a gun on you doesn't mean the police can shoot you, for example. They have to perceive that firearm is being used in some sort of offensive way to themselves or others, or otherwise poses a threat to them or others. So even if in fact he had a knife, even if he in fact had a gun, that would not seal the legal analysis. That wouldn't be like a one and done. We wouldn't be, oh, he had a knife, end of analysis. No, I disagree with my colleague here. That's not how that works. It's not how that works for the police. It's not how it works for citizen self-defense. It's not how it works for self-defense either. If you come up to me and you say some aggressive sounding words at me, like I'm going to kill you, and you pull something from your pocket and you point it in my direction and I shoot you, and it turns out that it's a cell phone, I was justified in shooting you because you were the first bad actor. You acted in a way that acted with actual threats to me, or perceived at least to a reasonable, subjectively or objectively, take your pick, right? Either to me subjectively or to a reasonably prudent observer, would appear to be a deadly weapon. So even though it was in fact a cell phone, I can act with deadly force because that belief is reasonable under the circumstances. By contrast, if you in fact have a firearm on you, but you're just like, being like not threatening, if you're not being threatening and I shoot you, it's not self-defense. Even though you have a gun on you, because you weren't threatening me, even though you have a gun, it's not justified for me because I had no reason to know that. So the very fact that you were in possession of it is not itself dispositive and is not even legally sufficient. And the very fact that you didn't have it, or the very fact you had it, is not legally dispositive, nor is it sufficient. It's all about perceptions and what can be reasonably or perceived, either subjectively or objectively. Self-defense or to the police. What it is in reality and what it is to the perception are totally different legal questions. And so just the very fact that you have a knife on you or not in no way answers these legal questions. The very fact you had a gun on you or not in no way answers these legal questions. It's about perception. It's about what a reasonably prudent person, if you want to put it in that parlance, if you want to put it in the objective parlance, what a reasonably prudent observer can perceive. Or if you're a police officer, even what a reasonably prudent police officer can perceive. Or if we want to go with qualified immunity, if we're talking about deprivation of rights under 1983, then we can be talking about what is well-established constitutional law. So under any of those standards, perception is often more important than reality. Let's listen to a little bit more.
The video. This would have just been another case of some guy with a knife who didn't, obey the police, and he was threatening them and they shot him. But I don't think there was a knife. I don't think there was a gun. If there was, we would have already known about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe there's not a knife. Maybe there's not a gun. But even accepting that predicate, it doesn't change my analysis that the police were justified. Because you yourself in this video said, it looks like a knife to me. And it looks like a knife if you think it looks like a knife, that kind of gets you where you need to be. Let's listen to a little bit more. All right, so that's the end of that video. All right, so let's listen to a little bit more of our friend here, Robert Gruler, who once again I want to emphasize that I consider him a fellow colleague, and I think that he's being honest in his analysis. So even though I disagree with him, I would like to frame this more as a gentleman's disagreement rather than as I don't like this guy, because I think he does very good analysis and has done very good analysis on the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting. I think he's done the best analysis of anybody on the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting. So, that's not necessarily to say that I agree with him 100% on Kyle Rittenhouse, so don't mistake me there. But I think he's done the most thorough, in-depth analysis of it. So I like this guy, unlike some other legal commentators whose analysis leaves something to be desired. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more about Jacob Blake and his warrants and stuff and try to factor that into our analysis as we go forward. Let's listen on.
About the warrant, right? It's about the warrant. Okay, well, if you look up his criminal history, and you're going to see that he's not a good guy. I was never defending him as a person. I was just deciding whether or not, on this very limited set of facts that we have, whether this shooting was justified or not. So the fact that he's got an open criminal case or past criminal history or an active warrant for his arrest or any of those things is relevant. But it's relevant to his arrest. It's relevant to stopping him. It's relevant to how they, are going to, put him under arrest, take him into a judge, see the judge, and the judge would issue a bond or, you know, hold him in custody or whatever it is. You don't get to shoot somebody. And
no, that's 100%, absolutely 100% clear. The Supreme Court has been 100% clear about this. You can't shoot someone to arrest them. You can't shoot someone merely because they're fleeing. You know, you can't use deadly force, even for a felon, just because they're arresting if you're the cops. That's an improper seizure under the Fourth Amendment. Can't do that. So he's absolutely 100% correct. If the only reason the police are shooting this guy, now, be clear, if the only reason the police are shooting this guy is to effectuate the arrest, that's a no-no. You can't do that. If there are other reasons, those reasons may or may not be valid. So we have to go into other reasons. But so far, Robert is 100% correct. You cannot use deadly force merely to effectuate an arrest. All right? All right, let's listen to some more.
Guy may be, you know, not the best, you know, person in terms of being an upstanding citizen, but that doesn't mean that you can just shoot somebody. So the fact that they knew that he had a warrant, if that's the case, I think there's a 911 call where they were talking about, yeah, you show up, this guy's got a warrant, he's got an open warrant. The other reason why a warrant, you know, warrant sounds really, really bad. It's really not that big of a deal. I think what happened in his case, this happens all the time in Arizona, people get warrants that they don't even know about. So what happened in his case, if you look up the public access, the public records in his court proceeding, you'll see that a case was filed with the courts, and they probably mailed out a notice that, hey, you've got a court date coming up. He didn't get the notice. It wasn't sent to an attorney. I'm sure he didn't have a lawyer looking out for these things for him. He wasn't, you know, being proactive. He's probably moved properties or got his mail at his mom's or his sister's or something like that. So he may not have even ever known that these new charges had come. And on that warrant case, you're still innocent until you're proven guilty, my friends. He may have been charged with all of these things, but that doesn't mean that he is going to be convicted of them. He's still in.
Yes, I agree with everything that was said so far. I agree with all of it. It's quite possible for someone to have a warrant and not be aware of it. Let me rephrase that. It's possible for them to be unaware of the warrant. All right. It's a little bit less possible for them to be unaware of the bad things that they themselves did that may have led to the warrant. So they may not know that the law is necessarily out for them as such. They may not know that there's an active effort, but you know, if you're the kind of person who engages in bad behavior to the point where warrants are being issued against you, it's probably somewhat likely that you're aware of your own bad behavior. It's also very rarely the case that it's the first bad thing that you do that gets you into trouble with the law. It usually, you know, it's not exactly that the first one's free, but, you know, on any given day, like just to take DUI as a random example, like on any given day, do you think the police catch 100% of people who drive drunk? Of course they don't. So then you have to factor in, okay, on the probability when someone was pulled over for DUI, what number, how often are they drunk? Like what number of times do they drive? What percentage of the time are they getting pulled over if they're getting pulled over for a DUI? You know, if it's their fifth DUI, you think it's the fifth time they've ever driven drunk? Probably not. You know, and so like also like if it's their first arrest warrant for insert X, do you think it's the first time they've done X? Probably not. Probably not. You know, it's also like well known in just like in sort of white collar crimes too. You know, the Securities and Exchange Commission, like I've talked to people in the SEC too, and they'll say like the same thing. It's like, you know, it's not the first financial crime that gets you, or even the second or third. It's when you start getting greedy and more blazing and more bold and stuff like that. It's usually somewhere down the line. So yes, this person may not have been aware of the arrest warrant that's against them. That's 100% possible. It's slightly less possible that they would be unaware that the police or law enforcement might have some interest in them in a more global sense. So there's that. Also, the fact that they have various charges against them is somewhat indicative that they have certain characteristics, which might be informative as to how they might behave with the police. For example, if a person is guilty of domestic violence, that might suggest the person has a temper. That might suggest the person acts with a temper in a more global sense. It might suggest that if they encounter the law enforcement, they are more likely to be violent. So it might be somewhat informative as to their behavior when they interact with the police. That they have traits that might suggest certain things and certain behavioral traits. So there's some things we can't we can form that. Of course, innocent until proven guilty is the absolute rule in our society, and we shouldn't ever be wary of that. But give that up. But while I absolutely applaud and wish this guy, his day in court, which he will now get, when the police are at least interpreting this information for the first time, they may take note. This person may have behavioral characteristics that are somewhat consistent with the charges which he has been accused. Might be a reasonable conclusion for a person to draw, at least on a, what shall we say, a probable cause standard, or even a reasonable suspicion standard. May not be so great in the criminal justice system when we're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt. Then we're talking about propensity. So when we're talking about at trial and we're talking about propensity evidence and whether or not you're guilty of this particular crime on a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, may not be so great in that particular context. For the police, when they're conducting an arrest, somewhat lower burden of proof, somewhat lower burden of production, maybe somewhat more relevant there. Let's listen on.
Innocent until proven guilty. Just because you want to side with the cops, or you really want to rail against Black Lives Matter or all these rioters and all the burning and all of that stuff down, which, by the way, I agree with you on that. This is not something that is okay. Somebody is innocent until they're proven otherwise. If they showed up and he had a warrant out for his arrest, they should have arrested him and taken him into custody, and they should have done it competently. They did not do this competently. This was
I would again challenge my friend Robert here that the police did not execute this competently. I'm not sure what he thinks the police should have done in this situation, but at least to me, it appears the police did conduct this arrest competently. There may have been other options that were available, and maybe some of those options seemed unappealing because the police thought he had a knife. But the police appeared to be conducting this arrest in a competent way. They appeared to be using tasers. They at least tried twice to use tasers. They appeared to be trying to use physical force. And then they had their guns drawn and they were commanding him to stop. And they were commanding him as he walked around the car, and only then shot him. So whether or not the police could have done other things other than what they did, sure. Maybe the police should have done other things. Maybe they should have run around and tried to flank him. But then again, they saw the knife. And then again, we know about that saying about the difference between winners and losers in knife fights, right? So I don't know that I would call this incompetent. To me, it seems competent. There might have been other choices that could have been made. These choices seem reasonable under the circumstances. And if Robert here really feels that this is incompetent, it's not 100% clear to me what more the police could have done. They already used tasers. They're already trying to effectuate the arrest with trying to struggle him to the ground. I'm not 100% clear what he thinks the police, what it would have been obvious to do. Because if we're thinking about incompetence, we're not thinking about here's some other choices that they could have done, right? We're not thinking about here's some other options that would have been available. If we're thinking incompetence, we're thinking they should have done X. They clearly should have done Y. Because they didn't do Z, that was why they were bad. I don't quite see that here, but maybe Robert will comment back and let me know what he thinks the police, what they clearly should have done that clearly goes to their incompetence. Okay.
Something where he kind of got the jump on him. He ran around the car. They were upset. They shot him. And now they're trying to justify it after the fact. So that's a whole separate issue. Let's go through the scorecard and see if anything is updated or if I'm just going to double down on my previous analysis. Let's take a look. So did the suspect have a deadly weapon? Didn't see anything. Didn't see anything there. I think truly if it was already there.
Well, to be fair to my friend Robert here, you did see something there. You, in fact, said so in the video we just saw. And I'm not sure exactly in the order of these things, but you said it looks like a knife. So you did see something there. Now, whether or not it was there is a whole other issue, but you absolutely saw it. You said so very clearly that you saw it. It looks like a knife to me. I mean, your language seemed pretty unambiguous, that it seemed like it looked like that knife to you. So you say, well, you didn't see it. I'm like, yeah, you did. You absolutely did. Now, what it was in reality is a little bit open to debate, but like what you saw, well, you saw a knife. I know that because you told me you did. All right, let's press on.
We would have known about it. That would have changed the analysis entirely, right? It would have been 3 points here, 1 point here. It would have been 1 point here. It would have been 1 point here. There really would have been no use of force alternative.
There was use of force alternatives. They absolutely used tasers, and they attempted to tackle. So suspect aggressiveness, approachive, withdrawing, threatening. I mean, he was withdrawing, so that goes to the cops. I don't know about verbal threats. Suspect deadly weapon. Like, I don't even agree with his tallies here. Suspect deadly weapon, he thinks it was visible. So, I mean, that's a point there. Verbal threats, unclear. Aggressiveness, approaching, withdrawing, or threatening. I mean, he was withdrawing. That's a point there. Use of force alternatives. The police did use a taser. That's a point in the cop's favor. Robert's here's tally leaves a little bit to be desired, in my opinion. I think he's putting points in the wrong columns, man.
The backup would have been there. It would have basically been a clean sweep for the police. But that's just not the case here. Did they have a reasonable belief of imminent threat? Was it necessary as a last resort? I really don't know. It's going to go back to the knife. Yeah, if they had a knife or if there was a gun in the car, then all of this would have changed. I have no problem changing that. I'm not here to just beat up on the police unnecessarily, but we got to look at the facts. And if the police had a firearm, if they had a knife and they didn't disclose it to us, then my guess is it really didn't exist.
It may not exist. Maybe it doesn't exist, but I don't think that's the dispositive issue. The perception of its existing is more than enough. When you go to the reasonableness of police behavior, when you're thinking about the constitutional analysis, when you're thinking about Fourth Amendment, you're thinking about the search, the seizure of a person. When you're thinking about Fifth Amendment, you're thinking about due process. When you're thinking about Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, no matter what kind of box you want to put this in, you're thinking about the person in the moment, and I mean, for all the problems qualified immunity exists, and people on this channel know that I have many, many reservations about qualified immunity. I am by no means a fan of qualified immunity, but this is the kind of thing qualified immunity was designed for. It's gone way off the rails since then, but this is what QI was invented for, right? These moments of gray in the real world where we're not quite sure exactly what's happening. It's like, and even if we didn't have QI, if we're thinking about this in terms of reasonable person, or we're thinking about it in terms of a reasonable officer, or we're thinking about it in those terms, and we're thinking about it like a self-defense shooting, I think that the analysis, it favors the police.
So what does that mean? It means that I'm doubling down on that video.
Okie doke. You can, I mean, that's fine. I mean, I politely dissent from my colleague here. I think he's getting this wrong. And then he comes out with this like shorter video, which is like 1:22, where he comes out with his end conclusion, just saying it's unjustified. And I'm like, well, okay, what is justified the right answer here? That's also another interesting question, because we're talking about the police. So we can be thinking about whether it's justified, or we could also be talking about reasonableness in terms of like qualified immunity, but that's more of a civil analysis than a criminal analysis, but we could be talking about it in that frame. But we could be talking about this in a lot of different frames. But let's listen to this last little bit, and then we'll come in some more.
The point is we have due process in this country. We have rights as citizens in this country. Many, many times the police overstep those boundaries. Doesn't mean...
Amen to that one, brother. Amen to that. You'll get no fight from me on the fact that the police overstep their boundaries. Anyone who's watched this channel for any length of time knows that I'm more than willing to crap on the police a lot, because they go off the rails a lot. So this is not about me being like a dyed in the wool, like the police can do no wrong. The police can do lots of wrong. The police can do all the wrong. So on this one, you and me are in complete agreement. The police can go way off the rails. In fact, if we even want to talk about what should be rather than what is, if we want to talk about more like policy or philosophy, we might even be closer, right? Rather than legal analysis. So if we want to talk about like what should be in a just world, Robert in here I might actually get along better. And in terms of the legal analysis, in terms of the world we actually live in, though, I don't think this is quite in the ballpark of some of the massive, horrendous police abuses that I've seen. This is not in the George Floyd world, where regardless of how that legal analysis turns out in the end, and we know from our prior coverage on here that I am somewhat dubious on the second-degree murder charges from the way the statute is written and the way the specific facts have unfolded. I think it's a bit of an overcharge, so we'll have to deal with that another time. We don't have the chance to relitigate the George Floyd thing right now. But, you know, even if the police ultimately are legally not guilty of some of the stuff they did, I think that they, as a practical matter, went past the rails. I think as a practical matter, they behaved wrongly. So their legal culpability is one thing, but their moral culpability, for lack of a better word, is definitely another thing unto itself. I think the police did a bad, regardless of what the law might support. In terms of whether or not the Jacob Blake shooting, the police did a bad, I'm not really seeing that on a philosophical level, but maybe our philosophies are different, so that might be a thing too. I don't know.
We should burn our cities down doesn't mean we should defund the police. That is not what I'm talking about at all. At all. I think that if we defund the police and we continue to burn our cities down, there's going to be a lot more of the violence that we saw. There's going to be a lot more shootings. We're going to see many, many more people like Kyle Rittenhouse taking matters into their own hands, because people are going to be tired of this stuff. People are going to be tired of seeing their buildings getting burned down. And
yeah, I've been talking about that a lot too on my own channel. One of the reasons we came up with police was to get rid of cycles of violence. And for what it's worth, ContraPoints just did a wonderful little video on this point too. A left-leaning person, if there ever was one, but I love her work. And ContraPoints was pointing out this exact problem. It's like, you know, one of the reasons that we invented police was to externalize the need for justice so that we wouldn't run into circles of violence. So for all the uncivil law fans who are also ContraPoint fans, you're welcome for that little point. I bet you didn't know that I watched ContraPoints, did you?
And then being told that they're at fault for these things. That's just not okay. And so, yeah, in this case, unfortunately, I think the shooting was unjustified. Kyle's case, the shooting was justified. That's just based on the evidence. That's just my analysis. I'm giving it my best go. I know many people are really inflamed, really up in the air over these topics. The best that we can do, the best I can do on this channel is to give you sort of my understanding of the analysis. Some people are going to like it. Some people are going to hate it, but I'm going to try to stay true to what I think is important. I'm going to try to maintain some integrity and just call them like I see them.
Cool. Well, that's all we really needed to do. So that's the end of those series of videos. So, you know, I don't really love or hate his analysis. I just disagree with it. I think that he gets it wrong. And I think the reason he gets it wrong is because he seems to think that what is true in reality is the end of the analysis, and it's not. The perceptions of what's true can be really, really important here. So, you know, I think that's, you know, but again, I want to make this absolutely clear. Robert Gruler here, I think, has done the best work of any of us. He's done better work than me, done better work than Nate, done better work than Viva, done better work than Leonard, done better work than anybody. I think he's done better work than anybody on the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting. He's done the most thorough, most complete, most in-depth look at this particular case. And, you know, I think that he's got it pretty much mostly right. There's probably some points where we disagree, but I think he's done his homework. And so I'm providing this critique in the spirit of some camaraderie, in the spirit of professional disagreement. And I hope that comes through, that I have respect for this individual. And if R&R is out there somewhere, I just want to let you know I'm more than happy to do a stream with you if you like. Whatever else, you know, I have a link to my Discord, should be in the description if you want to hop on my Discord. Be happy to talk to you there. I make myself available because I think you are a smart guy. And, you know, even though I disagree with you on the Jacob Blake shooting, I disagree with your analysis, I disagree with your scorecard, I disagree with many of the conclusions you reach, it's with a comes from a place of respect, and I hope that that's apparent. But in any case, my friends, that's all from me for now. I hope you're well. If you have not already done so, please like the video on your way out. Until later, my friends, I've been Uncivil Law. Cheers and goodbye.